morning, everyone. Thank you for being here so early in the morning, 9 a.m. We already introduced everyone, so I won't run through that again, but I am Joan O'Hara. I'm Vice President of Public Policy at the XR Association. We're a trade association who represents big tech all the way down to little startup guys in the XR industry. And one of the things that we work very hard to do on a daily basis is bring together a variety of stakeholders, voices from throughout the ecosystem of XR to try and develop and foster best policies for the responsible development of the technology. So this panel sort of reflects that philosophy, and I'm very honored to be here with such a distinguished panel. I've been telling them they're like the all-star lineup. We're very lucky to have this particular panel of gentlemen. So what does it mean it takes a village to build the metaverse? I think, especially in a crowd like we have at this conference, we tend to think of metaverse development in terms of technology and science. And of course, that is critical, and that will very much influence what the metaverse looks like. But there are other factors as well, and sometimes I think they're overlooked. Not at XRA, and especially in my role as Government Relations and Public Policy Vice President, I'm always thinking about this. But there is, I think, a tendency to look just within the industry in terms of how the metaverse is going to look 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But there are a lot of voices that are very important to this conversation and other types of influences, and they will impact everyone. So we've got law and policy, regulation that might be handed down by the government. We've got the voices of advocates and civil society representatives who are talking about things like privacy protection, content moderation. We've got market forces, economics, issues that are going on overseas. What are trade relationships looking like? And then we have industry itself. Obviously, as I said, the science and technology is very important and will determine what the metaverse looks like in conjunction with these other factors. We're also thinking about best practices that industry can put forward themselves. So what's the balance between best practices and standards that are industry-driven versus regulation and law that comes from government officials? All of these things are factors that we need to be thinking about. So the sooner we're able to do that and work together, I think the better the metaverse will be. So that's what I mean by it takes a village to build the metaverse. So we're going to discuss each of those and the roles and influences of various stakeholders in looking at this development over the next several years. So we have a wonderful panel here. I'll let you guys sort of tell us a little bit about each of your roles within your organizations, sort of to kick things off here. If you want to start, Michael Richards is with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
My name is Michael Richards. I'm Policy Director at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Within the Chamber of Commerce, we have a subgroup called CTEC, which is Chamber Technology Engagement Center, which is the domestic tech hub for the Chamber. There, I run the AI policy and digital transformation policy for the U.S. Chamber. But before that, I was on Capitol Hill for about 7 years.
Hey, everyone. Hi, I'm Joe Jerome. I work on the public policy team at Reality Labs. Sometimes it's a little bit unclear what the policy team does. Policy can be a little bit squishy, but I think we sort of have a two-way role. On one hand, we're out there trying to speak with a wide range of stakeholders, policymakers, civil society, sort of just the general public. I mean, a couple of my colleagues have been speaking here at this conference, and we always say, like, we're open to talk to anyone. We really want as much feedback as we can get to understand what people's concerns are and what people are really excited about. And that's half the role. The other half of the role is sort of internally focused. My role particularly, I work on product policy and product counseling. So I am talking to our product teams and our engineers and sort of, trying to get them, the way sometimes it's described is, trying to incept ideas into them to be concerned and aware of things like privacy, accessibility, fairness issues. And so, we really bring to bear all of the external feedback that we're getting in ways that we can sort of translate that to product to sort of get them to think about and build their technologies in ways that are responsive to public demands.
And giosaba?
Hey everyone, my name is Giosaba. I'm the Chief of Staff for Congressman Rogue Khanna, who represents this area in Congress, Santa Clara. It's our district, and we have a lot of the major tech companies in our district. He's been very focused on how do we make sure we can still foster innovation and technology, but also do it in a way that protects things like privacy, cybersecurity, national security, children's privacy. A couple of years ago, he introduced something called the Internet Bill of Rights, which is 10 principles for how we should come up with privacy legislation. And when we drafted that, we didn't have the Metaverse or XR in mind, but I think a lot of those same principles can definitely be applied to the world in the Metaverse, and all the privacy legislation out there should also apply to life in the Metaverse, and arguably the issues and the concerns will be exacerbated as this technology progresses. And so very excited to be on this panel and as we chat through some of these ideas.
And Carlos Gutierrez.
Sure. Hi, I'm Carlos Gutierrez. I am the Deputy Director and General Counsel for the LGBT Technology Partnership. We work at the intersection of technology and LGBT rights. So a lot of our work is policy-based, but we are big believers that in order for us to be able to have a voice in the policy discussions that are going on about these technologies, that we have to engage in the programmatic work as well. So we both do policy and programmatic, and we'll talk about that a little more. But much like Gio said, it's a lot of work around what are the rules of the road for the metaverse? How do we make sure that marginalized communities and other communities that are not always thought of first are thought of as we develop this technology, and that it is baked into this technology, that these communities are addressed. So I'm really excited to be here with everyone having this discussion.
Thank you. So you can see we've got a wide variety of interests here, and that's the point. It's going to take all of these stakeholders to help foster the right type of environment and the right type of development for something like a metaverse. So why don't we start with you, Joe?
Oh, great. Okay.
Tell us more about where you see the role of industry and a company who's really on the cutting edge of the metaverse like Meta. What's the role there in helping to shape what the metaverse will look like?
Well, look, it's no secret that Meta has made a big bet on the metaverse, and so part of that, I think, is really just supporting the ecosystem. I don't know if this is news to this crowd, but over the past year, we've launched a $150 million immersive learning initiative to sort of facilitate how we can use these immersive technologies, VR in new education settings and in ways that support creators to improve education. We also are very aware of a wider range of policy issues, which we'll talk about, privacy, safety, security, and we've launched a $50 million XR programs and research fund where we've had a number of organizations, civil society, academic partnerships across the world partner with us and do a lot of really interesting research and projects to sort of build out what the metaverse could look like. So I can tell you, at Meta, we think that the metaverse is going to do a lot of really cool things to enhance connectivity and experiences with other people. I'll say personally, though, having been at this conference, the world is our oyster here a little bit. At Meta, we're planning on rolling out a lot of really interesting technologies over the next decade that will hopefully be used to power connection. But also, it's going to be really useful and awesome to see what third-party creators do with this technology. And so I really think it's our job at Meta to be able to facilitate, basically what creators want and need for this technology. And some of that is technical. Many of you guys who are developers for Quest, have access to things like Presence Platform, which is a suite of mixed reality technologies to build really interesting new experiences. But there's also big policy issues here, like how we're going to deal with behavior in social VR, and that's going to vary from developer to developer. And as a platform, we sort of hope to be there to hear and learn from all of you.
Thank you. Carlos, can you tell us more about the role of civil society and advocates in helping to create this space and how you engage with some of the developers and the big tech companies?
Sure. Yeah. I think for us, when we started looking at the metaverse, and I will say that a lot of the interest came out of COVID. For me, we were stuck at home, my partner, my husband, and I, and we got a PSVR, PlayStation VR, and that was kind of life-changing for me in the sense of the community that I was able to join and the immersiveness of it. So I think for us, the metaverse starts with kind of the immersiveness and the presence that you have in the space, and how that is very different than other mediums. And that presents both challenges and opportunities, obviously, because of the presence, because it is so much more immersive. The kind of harassment and bullying that happens in other kind of gaming platforms can feel a lot more personal. But for our community, we are, from our own LGBT tech research, we know that LGBTQ individuals are early adopters of technology, and that we go to social media at an earlier age and more often than other communities. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the big drivers is, unfortunately, discrimination. We're one of the few minorities that can be discriminated against in their own homes. So for somebody who is kind of exploring the sexual orientation or gender identity, they may not have the option or the luxury to go home to their parents to talk about these issues. And most young people who are starting to kind of struggle with these issues go online first and kind of type in, what does it mean to be gay? Am I gay? Anyone who's watched, the series on Netflix Heartbreak or has seen, one of the kids, start struggling, and the first thing he did is go to his laptop and type, am I gay? And look online. So the metaverse has this opportunity for us of being able to do all kinds of things that we can't do in real life. But for us, looking at the way that the metaverse can build community and working with developers to talk about why it's important to have different rules of the road, and talk about kind of the harassment and moderation, and how do we react to attacks from marginalized communities in these spaces is really important, as well as why it is important that the metaverse be there for our communities, because it does have the potential to be immersive in a way that no other technology has been before.
Gio, some of these issues probably sound familiar. These are not topics that are limited to the metaverse specifically. Some of these challenges have been raised with respect to social media and 2D platforms. Can you tell us a little bit about your boss's perspective on issues like bullying and privacy and security, and how that might impact the development of the metaverse?
Definitely. Well, we were behind the 8 ball when it came to Web 2. Social media companies basically let them move fast and break things, saw the consequences of that, and Congress has been playing catch up ever since, and we still haven't even passed legislation to address those issues. Things in the metaverse, it'll be these issues of disinformation, harassment, basically will be on steroids. So we have an opportunity now before the metaverse is fully built, although I would argue in a way it's already here and it's just going to get better and better. But we're not fully living our lives in a VR headset. We're living in the metaverse of Slack, the metaverse of Zoom, the metaverse of email, and behind these screens. But we're not quite living in this world yet, although some people are beginning to explore that. And so I think Congress needs to get ahead of the issue, learning from what happened with Web 2 and realizing that things like the spread of disinformation will be even worse in the metaverse, because when you look at someone that looks real, either whether it's a deep fake or someone that has a virtual avatar, that's much different than seeing a bot account on Twitter. It'll be much more real. And are we going to allow companies to suggest and use algorithms to suggest people go to a specific political rally or political group where that will be much easier? So a lot of the same problems of being able to speak with a large number of people right now, maybe that's in a WhatsApp group and you can share a fake news article in a WhatsApp group and send that to 100 people. But what happens when you get suggested an invite to go to a political rally where there can be 1 million people? Whereas now you'd have to go to the rally, you'd have to show your face. Let's say it's a Proud Boys rally or a KKK rally. You run the risk, if you go there, of driving there, people will see you in the audience. Whereas in the metaverse, you could go via an avatar. And so a lot of these issues will be exacerbated because you can hide behind a fake avatar. Same thing, we're seeing this already with children using some of these platforms ending up in places like strip clubs. Whereas in the real world, they wouldn't be allowed into something like that. They wouldn't be able to drive their car and go to a strip club, whereas now you put on the headset, you can pretend to be a 50-year-old man and walk into something like this. So Congress needs to think about these issues before it gets to be where the toothpaste is out of the tube and it's harder to put it back in, I think, as we've seen with the case with Web 2.
Michael, over to you. Some of these questions are, I think, a matter of who I think we all agree that we need to obviously protect children, keep people safe. No one supports bullying, harassment. Everyone is in favor of privacy and agency. But is there a role here for industry itself to set these standards and best practices? Is it appropriate for them to enforce these responsibilities themselves? Or is it the government who needs to come in and sort of be the regulator? I assume it's going to be a balance of both, but I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, appreciate the question. It's a great question. And industry has a huge role to play here for best standards, best practices, and what that looks like. I mean, Gio just said it, that we're still not actually regulating on Web 2 issues. Yet, here we are getting to Metaverse, and, if we can't actually get to what happened 10, 15 years ago, how are we going to get to what's happening today? And this is where best practices come in from industry to come together, bring stakeholders together, have the conversations that need to happen from all sides of the table, determine what is the best approach on the industry side, and then move in the direction which at least provides those kind of safeguards in that format. On the regulation side of things, I think that the biggest issue right now is getting back to those Web 2 issues. A lot of these issues that we can address right now, be it a national data privacy law, be it readdressing COPA and different issues there are ways in which we can address these issues right now within the halls of Congress that would have huge impact here when we're actually having these conversations. But I think one of the issues now is when we have these conversations about national data privacy law and that conversations about COPA and other issues, we need to actually be thinking about the metaverse as well and how that will impact it.
Yep. Thank you. That's a very good point. Joe, I wanted to talk a little bit more about industry's role and what Meta might be doing to start thinking about some of these issues and getting ahead of criticisms. There are certainly lessons to be learned from the development of Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. Are you thinking in terms of lessons learned and applying them going forward, or do you feel like they're just completely novel questions when it comes to the metaverse?
No, I mean, I think it's easy for us in this room and everyone who's a big booster of the metaverse say that this is all brand new, but I think we're all sort of saying it's not. This is an outgrowth of existing issues. And I think, we've said this since we announced the shift from Facebook to Meta, that part of the opportunity here is this is a long time horizon before this is in the hands of everyone. And so that really gives us the opportunity to not only ask tough questions, but sort of grapple with them in a way that, I don't think we did a great job with in the past. Certainly at Reality Labs, we've done things like work internally to come up with responsible innovation principles, which are available online. There are a couple of high-level guidance ideas that we really try to constantly, again, I mentioned that half of my job is talking to product teams. I use these principles when I talk to product teams, say, hey, have you thought about these 4 things? We've also, since we've put those out, to be perfectly candid, we've gotten criticism from external voices that these principles don't really require a lot, or they're unclear, or they seem to be in tension. And I think that that's completely fair criticism. We'd like to see these sorts of principles emerge from all sorts of companies that are working on metaverse technologies. And I think a lot of companies are doing that sometimes. I think some of the technology vendors, a bunch of other people who are really powering some of the core technologies here, have put out some statements about what they're thinking at a high level in terms of privacy. I've certainly been impressed at some of the conversations over the past few days here about ethics and sort of forcing companies to think about the ethics of these technologies. And that's all stuff that I think we're doing at Meta, and we would certainly love to, talk to other companies, talk to other folks about how they're thinking. Hopefully we can do that through organizations like XRA that is already sort of doing some of that convening work.
Thank you for the plug. Appreciate that. Gio, what do you think about issues like privacy, security, conduct, well-being, in terms of net neutrality versus specific to something like the metaverse or immersive technologies? Do you think there are principles that are going to sort of cut across everything regardless of what the technology is, or do you think there need to be specific considerations given to technologies that are emerging, like immersive technologies, AR, VR?
I think we can use a lot of the same principles, that you should be able to own your data, know what data is being collected on you, being able to take your data and move it to a different world, or that interoperability piece is really important. As great as what Meta seems to be building, it would be a shame if you could only interact in the metaverse in that one way. So it's important to make sure that you can take all that data and all the friends that you've made and move that. So it's a lot of the same principles and issues that we've seen with Web 2 that we need to make sure that folks are thinking about as we move more into the metaverse. Also issues like antitrust, making sure that there are a wide number of companies in this space and that startups are not just being acquired by big players is important, as we saw in the case with Web 2 as well. So these are the types of things that we need to be careful on. And in terms of fostering growth and innovation, there's a role for Congress and the government to play in terms of regulatory clarity on a lot of this. If a lot of the metaverse is going to be using crypto and blockchain technology, we need more clarity in terms of, are NFTs securities? Are they commodities? What happens when you want to buy a digital suit in the metaverse? Converting that from ETH to your NFT, is that a taxable event? What if you made money on that? And so if we're going to foster, a benefit and a growth of this industry, which is important, and there are a lot of benefits to this, as we've heard this weekend, we need to make sure that there is that regulatory clarity to make sure that the innovation happens, while also making sure there are the safeguards that we've been talking about today.
That's a very interesting aspect, I think, of all of this is going to the economic impact and how the metaverse will function in terms of economics with things like crypto and ownership of digital clothes and NFTs and all of that. We have an idea of how all of this functions now, but it's going to come together in a very unique way, I think, within the metaverse. Michael, do you have any thoughts on economic impact and these issues like crypto and purchases within a virtual space?
Yeah, so it just kind of takes me back. Again, I'm a policy person, so that's where my head always goes, so I apologize for that. It just adds to the layer of how many things we're all putting together at one time in the metaverse, and that, trying to tackle one massive, this is how we're going to regulate this, just seems very much obscene, because then you're trying to do, well, we need to do crypto, we need to do NFTs, we need to do data privacy, we need to do COPA, we need to do, it's just, how do you do that all at one time? I've never seen Congress, and we are so reactive in Congress, it's ridiculous. So it's just one of these things that it adds up to that, and why, again, your first question to me about the need for industry to take a bigger portion in this, as far as building out their own recommendations about how to go about it, is a lot easier way to go about this and starting things off from the right foot.
I think it's also interesting to think about some of the legal implications. If someone is harassed or assaulted in the physical world, that's a crime, and there's also a tort involved, a civil suit potentially. What will that look like in the metaverse? And these are interesting questions that we're going to have to explore, and hopefully we can get to some answers before we're all completely immersed, so to speak, in this type of environment. But looking more to the optimistic side and getting away from the challenges for a moment, Carlos, can you tell us more about how you think this technology will benefit the LGBT community in particular? and what you've already seen in terms of response from the LGBT community.
Yes. First of all, happy Pride Month, everyone. It's a great time to be here talking about this. As I mentioned earlier, one of our biggest kind of drivers in our policy work is kind of our programmatic work, and I'm very thrilled that we actually are like launching 3 XR initiatives this month. It's been a busy month for us. And all of these are kind of around your question about how does this benefit the LGBTQ community. So one of the things that we've noticed is that there's a need for safe spaces and places in the metaverse where people can gather without fear of harassment. So we're launching a Horizon World LGBT tech world that has 3 kind of rooms in it. For each of our verticals, a Power On program that provides technology for LGBT centers that deal with homeless youth, and a PASS program, which is our STEAM program that talks about how STEAM is used, how LGBT individuals in STEAM got to where they are, and showing a roadmap to other LGBT youth about it. So we're creating this Horizon World Room to test this concept of how does it work, when we create these spaces, what are the challenges we're gonna have. So the second kind of way that we are looking at the metaverse is also kind of how do we use the metaverse to get our message out. And we have partnered with this incredible company in Ukraine called FaceMe, and they have created for us a Pride filter. And they've created for us a couple of filters around Pride that we are now using to kind of get our message out. And our wonderful models, Chris Wood, our executive director, and Joe Cap is wearing our activation t-shirt. So those are actual AR shirts. So please come up to him, activate, and you can see our Happy Pride message. So we're looking at how that impacts. But one of the things that we're most proud of is our collaboration with another startup that was here, and they were actually at the pitch competition yesterday, Innerworld. And Innerworld is a peer-to-peer counseling system program that has 24-hour access for cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. And we're launching an LGBT meetup, bi-weekly meetup with Innerworld so that people have access to an LGBT-specific space. Our hope and what we're driving towards is, as part of our programmatic work, our Power On program, we provide technology to 80 centers around the country. And part of what we're gonna be doing is providing headsets to these centers so that LGBT individuals who may not have access to this technology can go into an LGBT center, put in a headset, and take advantage of like a movie night or a trans meetup. So you may have a teenager in Idaho who may not know anyone else like them. And we're going to give them the opportunity to move into a space like this and try it out and meet other people like them. So for us, the potential of this technology to be life-changing for individuals around the country is massive. And our concern, I guess, is, and when we talk about industry, is that we want to make sure that these communities are being baked into the planning of all of these platforms. So we're not, when we talk about education, when we talk about employment, we're not just talking about urban areas where there's a huge, high-speed internet for everyone and, $2,000 headsets. How do we make sure the marginalized communities or communities that are not normally the communities that are thought of when we're developing these technologies, how do we make sure that they are counted, and how do we make sure that this technology benefits them as well? So all of these initiatives are basically kicking the tires to see how we react to these things, and from there come back and talk about the policy with a sense of experience behind us, at least, of having tried this stuff out.
Joe, back to you, just building off of what Carlos is saying. What can Meta, or what is Meta doing, and what can other big tech companies be doing to help sort of facilitate these type of ideas like inclusion, helping underserved populations, helping underrepresented populations to sort of have a bigger voice potentially, to meet other people like them?
Sure.
Is there a responsibility there from the tech side?
Oh, absolutely, and I think we certainly think so. I mentioned early on that we've started a bunch of funding programs that are facilitating stuff like this. I think the entire industry needs to do that. One of the chronic tensions that we always have in tech is that the early adopter in tech tends to be a certain stereotype. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I need to say that out loud what it is, but it tends to not be super inclusive. And that's a real problem. And that's something that, we think a lot about at Meta and at Reality Labs. We have processes internally to think about inclusion for our products. One of my colleagues was talking yesterday about avatars and ensuring that avatars give you the sort of, I guess, the optionality to express yourself in a lot of different ways is really important, and sometimes that's stuff that's overlooked. We have I'm thinking again about a lot of our internal processes where, again, like every conversation that we have with product teams when we're looking at roadmaps, we pretty frequently are like, all right, are we thinking about how this is going to be inclusive of a lot of people? And then, again, at Meta, we want to ensure that people have access to this technology. That's a real problem. Like, it's going to be a while before the cost goes down for some of this stuff and it gets into everybody's hands. And that's a problem. We were talking before the session started that one of the real challenges that Meta and I think all of us face is that the proof is in the pudding. Like, until people access these technologies and use them, it's easy to dismiss them. Anecdotally, I've had a lot of friends who are like, what is this VR? It's just another video game. Who cares? And until I plopped a headset on them and made them try out a fitness experience or even any of the immersive experiences, I was actually able to convince a couple of friends to buy Quest 2 devices, but it required putting them in the headset first. And so we're going to have to figure out ways across this industry to get the technology into the hands of folks and then make it affordable and accessible. It's a big challenge, and it's certainly something that we think a lot about and would encourage everybody to be thinking about, no matter your size, whether you're a big company or a small developer, figuring out ways to do outreach to sort of underrepresented voices and communities here.
And I know that that's important to lawmakers as well. Whether it's a constituent base or it's, people in your own family, making sure that everyone is able to take advantage of this technology and that it's developed in a way that has the potential to help people. From your perspective on Capitol Hill, what can people do, whether it's the stakeholders that are here sitting with you or people out in the audience, what can stakeholders do to help educate Congress and bring their concerns to the lawmakers who are going to play a role in shaping this technology in this industry?
Yeah, well, it's very important that everyone has the access to this type of technology, and we're still dealing that, again, with Web 2. We don't have universal broadband in this country. The infrastructure bill that passed has some funding to get us there, but if there are people who can't access the internet, let alone a fast enough speed to put on a VR headset, that's going to be exclusionary by definition. So there's a hardware and technological aspect to this that Congress can provide funding on. And then in terms of educating members and folks in DC, making this part of the privacy conversations that are taking place. Right now, the metaverse is not on a lot of people's radar in DC. I'm based in DC, and I came out here and decided to go check out a Quest at the Meta store in Burlingame, but there isn't a Meta store in DC. There isn't a Meta store in other parts of the country yet. And so it's still a very new technology. That was the first time I had tried it. And you hear about how immersive it is, and you hear about the potential change that it can bring, but until you try it, your imagination can't, take you to where this might be going. My first reaction was that I got a little dizzy and sick. But after that, I was totally immersed in this world, playing this punching, boxing game on top of a volcanic island. And when I took it off, I had literally forgotten that I was in this store in Burlingame. And so how are we going to legislate? How are policymakers going to make laws when they haven't truly, it'd be like making policy on driving on the roads and never having driven in a car. And so half of it is just making sure people have experienced something like this. You don't have to be a user or a gamer using this all the time, but it is important for people making these decisions to at least use the technology.
Can I make another plug? XRA did this at the keynote a couple days ago, where they showed a map of where all of you guys are building your products, and then they overlaid where members of the Reality Caucus were, and there's not many. I'm really impressed at the turnout at this early morning session, but all of us have an obligation to reach out to our lawmakers. They are responsive to their constituents. So if you're in a district anywhere in the country, reaching out to your lawmaker and informing them about the tech that you're working on and this metaverse is a good way to elevate this issue. And I think that that's going to be a net positive for everyone. So just a plug and a call to action if you guys are interested.
That's exactly what I was just
Oh,
gonna
all
say.
right, sorry.
But it's much more credible when it's coming from someone other than someone who works for. No, we work very closely with what is called the Reality Caucus, and it's members of Congress who have come together to learn more about and disseminate knowledge about our industry. So AR, VR, MR, metaverse issues. But as Joe said, it's a pretty small group. It's like half a dozen members right now. And they're fantastic, and they're very supportive, and we do events with them off the Hill and on the Hill. And I think as this industry becomes more and more on people's radar, there'll be more people joining. But you can help very much by talking to your member of Congress or sending an email encouraging them to join the Reality Caucus. You can come to our website, XRA, and we can help you out with that. Liz Hyman, who's our CEO, did a call to action on Tuesday if you were here, or Wednesday, yes. Thank you, Liz.
And the QR code is at our booth.
Right,
So you can scan and get.
exactly. But, as Gio said, a lot of the members of Congress have never tried this technology, and yet they're going to be responsible for crafting legislation and, some of the regulation around this. So the more we can get them involved and the more we can get them comfortable with this technology and the more we can help them to understand the tremendous benefits. We haven't talked here about many use cases, but, I am sure I'm preaching to the choir here. There are uses in healthcare, in training doctors, in treating patients, in manufacturing, in education, in public safety. I mean, across the board, you name the sector, and there's a use case associated with XR. So the more we can let members of Congress know that this is a technology that's more than just entertainment and gaming and social media, I think the more interested they will be, and the better, as a result, the better their legislation will be. So thank you for mentioning that, but it's called the Reality Caucus, easy to remember. So you want to talk to your representative in your district and encourage them to join. Another question for you, Michael, from the Chamber's perspective. I'm sure that you think about market forces and how that shapes an industry. Can you talk a little bit about how you think market forces and users and adoption of this technology will help to shape the industry as it goes forward?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about this is I really don't know where this goes, to be completely honest with you. I think we were talking about third-party developers and the excitement around that. I think market forces will push the technology in certain ways, but I'm actually more optimistic about where things are going to go because of the market forces and where the optimism is within the technology and how that works out. But again, I think we talked just recently about the education piece of this and how that works. I'm extremely excited about that part of the technology and putting our kids in classrooms with the top, teachers in the world and having them, reduce the skills gap in that phase, as well as, the uses between industry and, the market forces for that, in that, this can reduce fall rates, this can reduce, problems on sales floors and things like that could potentially, cause inefficiencies and things like that. So I think the market forces are everywhere here, and my biggest thing is I'm extremely optimistic about where the technology goes.
Well, on that note, I actually was going to start with this, but we could sort of conclude with this. I was interested in hearing from each of you sort of what your vision is for the future of XR technology and what you're most excited about. So why don't we start with you, Carlos?
Sure. I think my vision and what I'm most excited about is the sense of community that marginalized communities can get. And, we work a lot with rural communities and with communities where there's not a lot of LGBTQ individuals. And the potential of, a trans teen being able to go to a center and put on a headset and have a movie night with trans teens around the world and just hang out in a space where they feel comfortable and seen is transformative. So for me, what I'm most excited about is using this technology to bring marginalized communities closer together, create a sense of community, and give people a place to be, themselves, their true selves, in a safe, inclusive manner. So that's what we're working towards. That's what we're testing out. I look forward to being here next year, letting you all know how that goes at another panel. So, yeah, the sense of community and the sense of, and also, education and job opportunities can now be we can now kind of roll that out to marginalized communities or underserved communities in a way that we haven't been able to before. There's a lot of issues around, broadband and these kind of issues that we have to address. But you can see us putting, one of these headsets in an LGBT center and doing a VR certificate program training through a headset that somebody can go and do online in VR. So there's a lot of potential here to bring people who don't usually have access to these tools together in a way that they haven't been able to do before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, I do believe we're going to be spending most of our time in a metaverse. We already are, but it's going to be so compelling that this conference is in person, but one day it'll be virtual. And right now, it doesn't make sense to do something like this virtual because it is still better to be next to each other here. We can meet you afterwards. There is still something better to being in person, but at a certain point, it'll feel pretty much the same. We had a panelist on here who had COVID and wasn't able to participate. And that wouldn't be the case if we were doing this in the metaverse and we didn't lose out on any of the in-person feeling of that. The other part that I'm really excited about is the potential to increase empathy for problems around the world. I know that people like the New York Times have tried this with some VR with your phone, and it's interesting, but it's not quite as compelling as where the technology will be. But imagine in 5, 10, 15 years where you can actually feel like you're in Yemen and you're looking at people who are starving. You're seeing the war there. A couple of years ago, I did this VR experience of crossing the Mexico-U.S. border, where you have Border Patrol come and basically arrest you and feel what that is. And it's one thing to read about what that experience is like, or look at the animal suffering that's going on in factory farming. It's one thing to hear about that or see a video of that, but to actually be there and see it, I think that has a huge potential for increasing human empathy and people caring about the suffering that's going on around the world.
So I think Reality Labs is working on a lot of cool stuff. It's one of the reasons I work there. But just having spent the past few days at the expo here, I mean, there's just so much cool stuff going on. And this is going to be maybe too enthusiastic, but I really think that all of this is really like leading to a new way for us to basically interact with and have new relationships with technology. And I think that that's really going to be a really powerful connecting tool. I didn't get an opportunity to talk about it, but I'm wearing the Ray-Ban Stories product here. And we don't oftentimes think about that as sexy as AR and VR. But just the sort of ability to do hands-free audio and video capture, that's interesting. But the actual thing that I love about this is the voice assistant and over-the-ear audio, which has replaced sort of earbuds for me and gives me sort of a real sense of empowerment. And I think that type of technology, that type of sort of including voice assistants and other types of functionality in existing technology is going to be really, really cool.
Yeah, so I think, and this is just because I was on a call about this not too long ago, right now we have 11.2 million open jobs within the United States. Using the metaverse right now, we could probably start training and upskilling and reskilling people to take these, better paying jobs, much more, with upward mobility kind of prospects right now to put people in better jobs and allow that to happen. And that's, right now, that seems like a great way of using the technology.
Thank you so much. It's, it's from a policy perspective, which is where many of us sort of exist, it's easy to focus on the challenges. And it's really important that we're doing that so we can get things right and make sure that this technology has the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. But we don't want to lose sight of the tremendous potential and all of the good that it's doing currently and what it can be doing in the future around things like building community and helping to empower people and creating jobs and opportunities. So it's, we have challenges that we need to address, but the future, I think, is very bright. And I hope you get a sense from this panel here. I mean, we've got a wide spectrum of interests, but each of them play a role in developing what the future of XR technology is going to look like. So it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Thank you so
yeah.
much. This has been amazing. George, Joe, Michael, Joan, amazing job. I want to open this up now to questions from the audience. Okay, we've got one here in the front row, and can you put your hands up if you'd like to ask a question? Okay, so we've got at least 3 questions okay, so let's try to have room. We have about 5 minutes.
So my contention is the metaverse already exists. Maybe not as glamorous as you might think it is through the Hollywood versions, but all the components are there, and actually some of them have been around for a long time. For the kids, there's Roblox and Minecraft and several other things where they get involved with each other, they communicate. Excuse me. And adults have other various means of social media, and all of them generate very strong emotional feedback. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it very abusive. So what are people doing right now? It's not a one company solution. It's something that has to be done at a very large scale. And in fact, I'm not sure even a US solution is going to work, because you're talking about having worldwide movie nights. And if that system gets hacked by a government where it's illegal to be LGBTQ, then you got a real problem. So I guess to form a question here, something that is responded to, even though that you can't come up with the solution in the next year to 3 years is when everything's going to be out, what is starting on? What are people actually going to do, and not in a reactive sense that has typified Congress and several other organizations, but what's the first steps going out there to actually be able to do something that the public can interact with and respond to?
Who would like to take that question?
I tried to make it open.
So it's a great question. I'll volunteer and hopefully say something with some substance. Take your point that this is a very U.S.-focused panel, and it's not even just that we've got global issues with this metaverse, but there's also going to be different regulatory schemes that are already happening. This group might be very interested in some of the rules that are in Europe that apply to technology. But I guess my answer to your question is, I think it's a full spectrum sort of thing. I think industry will certainly play a role. Like, I've seen lots of discussions over the past few days of just standard setting the bodies, both from a technical standards, but also just sort of best practices. So we definitely need to have forums where companies can come together and just sort of talk out their approaches and frankly be very public about their approaches, so we can understand where there could be gaps or where risks could emerge. I think there's also a really important role for, I come from civil society, so advocacy organizations. I think it's a really important role for them to get way more involved in this space, because they can sort of push us to do better. And there already are some efforts like that. There was the XR Guild, there was a panel on that a couple days ago. Obviously, I think some people here know about organizations like XRSI. So there are some forums like that, and that hopefully we can see more of that, because the more voices, the better, from my perspective.
Great. We have another question here.
I wanted to know, who are your go-to organizations for the valid research that you base your internal and external policy on? And since I have the mic, I will do an XRA plug, because they do excellent white papers.
Thank you.
I guess that's a question for Meta.
I think so.
So, it's an interesting question. So one thing that I'm relatively new to the company, but I've really come to appreciate the user experience research teams that we have internally. They do a lot of amazing qualitative and quantitative work that really does inform some of our policy. And then, frankly, for me, when I'm we've had a couple conversations over this conference about how you find information about what's going on. I tend to rely a lot on what academic researchers are doing. I think they have a certain sort of credibility, and I come from organizations. I've written papers that have a certain perspective, but academics tend to be really great at offering up, I think, really rigorous methodology. And actually, something that we do at Meta is try and engage with academics to sort of understand what their concerns are, understand how they're researching and probing our technologies, for better or worse. And I think that that's a really important outlet.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you all so much. I thought this was really great. It's no secret, and y'all alluded to this, that there is a serious lack of technological expertise in the government. I mean, Rep. Khanna is one of maybe a dozen members of Congress who are really well educated on technology. Any ideas on how to continue to build that expertise to encourage technologists to work more in the government, both in Congress and the executive branch and more broadly, because it leads to serious regulatory issues having this lack of expertise?
I think that's a question for you, Jan.
Sure. Or did you want to?
I mean, I can speak to this, or if you want to speak to it. I mean, there's a lot of different things Congress has that we pull from. My previous life, there's things like Tech for Congress, which provides industry experts into actual congressional offices. IEEE does fellows as well. There are a lot of different ways in which we can pull from expertise and have people within our offices provide that technical necessity. I mean, but then there's also things like the caucuses that we were already talking about, the Reality Caucus, there's an AI caucus, there's a Digital Transformation Caucus. These caucuses, what they're meant for is bringing in, the smarter people who can provide that actual analysis, that inputs that members of Congress are not going to get on a day-to-day basis, and provide that education to them. And it's really important that if there is a caucus, something like the Reality Caucus, it makes sense that you go to that caucus and say, this is important. We need our congressmen and women to be in this caucus to actually learn about it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you hit the main points. I mean, other ideas that folks throw around are just increasing the pay. For a technologist to leave Silicon Valley and go work in the government is a serious pay cut. So that's one thing that we need to make improvements on. The other is just some sort of a rotation or some sort of national service or even a national guard of sorts for technologists to go in and serve for a couple of years and then come back. And that way they're not making a move away from technology in the Valley, but can go do some national service for a year or two. Maybe they don't make as much as they would have made in Meta, but then they can come back and take what they learned and offer that experience. So those are some ideas. But there was also an office in Congress that got defunded, a technology office that needs to come back.
It's almost been 30 years.
30 years, yeah. If any time is the
It's
time,
Reagan,
now is
right?
the time.
Yeah.
No.
A question from the audience?
Oh, thank you. Hi. Thank you for having this. This is my favorite panel so far. I think it's a very important.
That
very
was our
important-
objective.
So my question is more as a parent, and I'm sorry, this is mostly a meta question. Something you said at the beginning, I think you said, I'm sorry, paraphrase, something like behavior in applications is going to be different from developer to developer. I found that kind of alarming. It sounded like maybe it's kind of a loose policy, and Meta's obviously in such a hugely powerful position to set standards, very strong standards of what things are allowed, are not allowed in applications. Can you speak to that a little more?
So it's a fair question, and it's actually something I think that we struggle with as we're trying to figure out what, I guess the word is, governance looks like in the metaverse. And the challenge is, I think on one hand, we've certainly said that we want to have safe and respectful spaces. It's certainly something we're spending an enormous amount of time and energy on to sort of make Horizon Worlds a safer place. But on the other hand, if this is the next computing platform and the evolution of the internet, you have a situation where the internet was really decentralized. For better or worse, we had communities like Reddit or 4chan that really crossed the spectrum from being very, I guess I don't mean to cast aspersions to any of these companies, but you have online communities that are have very clear rules, very tight governance and controls over and kick people out if they do the wrong thing. And then you sort of have this, on the other hand, we're going to have open expression and let everyone be what they want to be. And the real challenge is, while some people see some of these communities as bad or toxic, do they have the right to exist? Presumably yes. Presumably we don't want to snuff all of that out. And so that's something we're sort of we're honestly struggling with. When we have a platform like Oculus, where we have social VR experiences that are going to range from ours to Rec Room and VR Chat to Alt Space, and all of those communities have, I think, very different already demographics and different sort of community standards. And so you're right that, we can place a really powerful thumb on the scale, but should we do that? And that's an open question that I think we're still struggling with.
Thank you so much to our speakers, and I have learned so much today. I feel like you being here is just one of many steps for us to have a safer, more inclusive metaverse, and I'm so grateful for you to be moderating this panel today, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, and thank you to all the panelists.
Yeah, thank you.